This program is brought to you by Emory University.
On February 5th, 2015, the Office of the Provost at Emory University hosted a forum titled Writing and Placing Op-Eds. The panel members discussed the nuts and bolts of writing opinion pieces and editorials based on their own experiences and described how publishing op-eds advanced their scholarship and careers. The speakers were Nathan McCall, lecturer in African American Studies at Emory and a former reporter for the Washington Post, Lynn Huffer, Samuel Candler Dobbs, professor of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Emory, and Carol Anderson, associate professor of African American Studies at Emory. In this video, Professor Anderson recalls how she overcame her initial reluctance to write opinion pieces, then published a controversial op-ed in the Washington Post, which ultimately led to a book deal.
I stand before you as the reluctant public intellectual. And so let me tell you that story. So my friend Dorothy Brown was in the OpEd Project, and I see her producing these wonderful pieces, and then the OpEd Project is having the second round. And Dorothy calls me and says, I really think you need to apply. And I'm like, you know that, and she's like, I think you really need to apply. Now, my friend is from the Bronx.
South Bronx.
And I fully understand when South Bronx comes at you like that, you apply. And so I did, and I got in. But I'm a historian, and so part of what I had to wrap my head around was, as a historian, how do you delve into those things that are contemporary issues? I mean, I know how to do it in the classroom, but how do you do it? And I write books, so how do you do it in 800 words? I mean, all of these things were the things that I began to learn in the OpEd Project. And my first piece that was published dealt with the shooting in Florida of Jordan Davis by Michael Dunn, and dealing with that and pulling not only upon history, but also upon sociology and psychology to explain threat, and also to explain the consequences when threat is only identified as black. Because then you have these instances like the young white man who went into the school in Atlanta with an AK-47 and nearly 500 rounds, and nobody saw him as a threat until he's shooting out the window. Those sorts of things, and to begin to talk about what does that mean in our society. So that was the hook for that piece. Well, when I wrote that piece, and and I understand evidence, 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 evidence. Part of what happened is when you write on race in America, let me say it again. The vitriol that was coming through from folks who don't know me and making all kinds of assumptions about who I am and what I do in my classroom, and all of what they were saying was absolutely wrong, but it fed into a line that was perfect for being able to try to discount fact, evidence, evidence, fact, evidence. And the other piece of this public intellectual thing is I'm basically a very private person. And so having my email inbox fill up with this stuff, not just the comment section, but I'm like, Dorothy, I'm not really sure I want to do this public intellectual. She went, mm-hmm. I said, no, I'm really thinking that maybe, mm-hmm. And I went, okay. And so then Ferguson jumped off. And my public work is usually with organizations who are on the ground dealing with injustices. And as I'm watching Ferguson jump off, and I'm listening to all of these news and media people explaining what they think they see, and it's so wrong. And I'm sitting up there at my computer, shaking my head no, as they're doing basically Black Folks Gone Wild, without really delving into what has created that situation in Ferguson. And I'm doing this, and in the Department of African American Studies, my neighbor is Nathan McCall. I am lucky because I started writing. And I said, Nathan, I've got something here, but I really, really need you to look at it because part of me is so angry. I need to make sure this isn't a polemic. And I also need to make sure that this is publishable. And so I'm writing. He looked at it, kicked it back as if he were my dissertation advisor with arrows and X's, and the piece got tighter and stronger. And I had my lead at the time, because then Eric Garner was killed. And so my lead at the time was to compare Cliven Bundy, who has basically stolen $1 million from the federal government, is armed and coming at federal agents with a posse full of weapons, and how he walks and lives to tell the tale. But a young man who is on the corner with a cigarette, maybe, and so maybe New York City lost, 22 cents worth of taxes, is in fact killed. So that's my lead, and I think, I've got it. Lo and doggone behold, if the piece in some, I don't know whether it was Huffington Post or CNN.com, dealt with Cliven Bundy and Eric Garner as I went, that's a fresh razzmatazz. And actually, that was a blessing. Because then I had to do what we do as scholars. I had to really spend a minute and think about, what am I really saying? I had the bottom piece because I had the pieces where I'm looking at the history that leads us to this moment and the consequences of those decisions, those historical decisions. And there was this moment right before our last op-ed meeting, and I went, oh my gosh, this is white rage. What I'm seeing, and it's not the kind that we often think of with the Klan, but this is the kind that is ensconced in Congress, the kind that's ensconced in the Supreme Court, that are making these decisions that seem so neutral, but in fact are absolutely devastating to the Black population, particularly when African Americans have some level of advancement against all odds, that you see this thing pop up. And I'm writing quickly, boom, 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 and I shoot that opening paragraph to Nathan. Nathan, I got it. This is white rage. He, boom, pinged back so fast, you must have been right there at the computer. You went, whoo. Now you're writing to the front page. Yeah. And that is the piece that I put on top of it. But then I looked, and I couldn't figure out how to get this thing down to 800 words. I gutted, condensed. You can't play with the font like they do. So I'm just like, okay, how do I do this? and so then I called a friend of mine, Jelani Cobb, and Jelani writes for The New Yorker. And I said, Jelani, I have a piece. And this is what I'm looking at, this is what I'm talking about, but I don't quite know how to place this, because this is not going to be an 800 or 700 or 400 word piece. This thing is running around about 1,100, 1,200 words. And he said, that's Washington Post Outlook. Let me make the introduction. And he made the introduction with the editor, and from there, the editor looked at it and said, oh, this is good. We'll get back to you. They did a lot of the fact-checking, because that's one of the things is that, so what you don't see in these op-eds is that when you turn them in and you put them into the the body of your email, not as an attachment. In the body of your email, there are also the sources where you got that information. Because the newspaper, or we call them, wants to make sure that everything that you're saying is accurate. They went through, they fact-checked. The next thing I know, it's published in the Washington Post. And I'm like, right? And I'm thinking, oh, this is good. And then my inbox blew up. I learned that I needed to put my crack pipe down. I learned that, yes, which is really saying something for somebody who doesn't drink, right? Okay. I learned that they had it right in South Africa with apartheid, so that we Negro criminals would be locked away from the rest of society. And so my inbox is dripping with this kind of vitriol. But at this moment, I'm like, yes, this is what a public intellectual does. And one of the things that one of our leaders said is, in the OpEd Project, is that when you say things of consequence, there are consequences. The other option is to be inconsequential. I chose not to be inconsequential. Then the grand jury came back. And so in that original Washington Post piece, there were 5,000 plus comments, because they stop at 5,000, so you don't know how much they go up to. And I went, whoo, and I could still tell from my inbox as well, I have hit a vein. And the letters I received in my mailbox, snail mail. So when folks are really to send you snail mail, you know you have touched them. Okay. Then November came. And that's when the grand jury, both in Missouri and in Staten Island, basically said no crime has been committed, although you had 2 unarmed black men dead. That piece went viral. It wasn't that I resubmitted it. It was that because it was sitting there on the internet, and the timeliness of it and the relevance of it spoke to a large population that began to start retweeting it, began to post it on Facebook. The next thing I know, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is emailing me saying, who holds the copyright to this? We want to run it in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And then the next thing I know, on a Twitter feed, it's coming up in the Chicago Tribune. I'm like, whoa. And again, the thing is blowing up. I'm getting a sense that it has gone viral. I start getting calls from the BBC, from CNN, from NPR, to do interviews, because trying to explain what we're seeing in America at this point. And that is what being a public intellectual does. It helps you provide a framework for people who are trying to understand something that is just mind-boggling, that is mystifying. Then the next thing that I knew, okay, I'll tell this part of the story, is I get this email from a literary agent in New York. I read your piece on white rage. It is powerful, eloquent, and elegant. I think there's a book here. Well, and he's giving me his bona fides. These are the people that I represent. And I'm looking at this list going, you know, you're like, but you're trying to be cool. But I'm on the phone. Okay. So I called one of the people and she said, he's fabulous. And so I contacted him and we began this conversation. And he understood the vision for this piece. The next thing I know, I'm writing a proposal for a trade press. And that proposal, and then I'm spent a week interviewing with a series of trade presses. I'm interviewing them, they're interviewing me, and then the proposal goes up for auction. And it went to auction. I mean, I'm looking at this going, this is emerging out of an op-ed that I wrote where I'm trying to understand Ferguson, I'm trying to understand Staten Island, I'm trying to understand America. And I'm happy to say that the auction was quite successful. Yeah. And I'm spending every Tuesday and Thursday, except I promised to be here, writing like crazy for a book that Bloomsbury won the auction, which is a subsidiary, a division of Macmillan. And I'm writing the book White Rage now for them to be published next year. Yeah, yeah. So as a reluctant public intellectual, there are times when you have to either have South Bronx on you, forcing you to be really true to your expertise and what you have to bring, and then pushing forward and being willing to accept the role of what it means to be able to translate and decipher all of the cacophony that's out there in the system and make it legible to an intelligent audience that is really hungry for knowledge. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.